that just walked in, we're glad to have you. Welcome. Mary? Nice to have you, Mary. I failed to mention about Alice Earline. Her and her husband, they had to go back to the doctor because they reached a plateau and weren't getting any better, and they changed their medicine on them. And so they've really had this bronchial issue going on. Did remember, Jan, you and your daughter particularly in prayer this morning. And God is still on the throne today. Well, we're turning to Psalms chapter 91. So if you don't have a quarterly, there's probably a hymn book. Not hymn book. Yeah, there are hymn books, but that won't help you a lot. But the Bible will, right there between the two hymn books. And it's Psalm chapter 91. If any of you happen to have read the introduction to the lesson today, it was a small little illustration about a seminary class. Did anybody happen to have read that? Okay. And in the class, they were discussing how they got saved. And so they were going around the room, and one said that they got saved in revival. Another one said that they got saved through a one-on-one witnessing of a friend of theirs that was a Christian. And then what was interesting is that one of them said that they got saved through rocket evangelism. And before I read the rest of that, it had my attention already. And what it was, they were in Vietnam, and they were in a foxhole, and the munitions that were firing above them, God was able to speak in the midst of that. God doesn't use drastic means unless drastic means are necessary. We've talked about that before. But this fellow was in a foxhole, and we've heard many times about individuals who were in fear for their life came to Christ. Sometimes they lived the rest of their life for Christ, and sometimes they made promises to God that they failed to keep later on. But today it's about the security that you and I can have in an insecure world. I don't think that I have to prove to you that our world is kind of topsy-turvy and lacks stability, and you just don't know what is going to happen. I read a story this morning, and it was about the president of the Philippines that had stated that if you do not have the vaccine, if you've not been vaccinated, and you are a risk of giving it to others, we will put you in jail. And then in that same article, someone said, seems like I heard this week how if you don't have the vaccine in the United States, we'll come looking for you. We'll knock on your door. What's that? Yeah. So we live in a really wild and crazy world. It dawned on me one day, a few weeks ago, that the doctors that we have today also went to universities. And universities have been the focal point of radicalism. And a lot of times people have been radicalized. Sometimes people have come through. I even know of people in my own family that have been radicalized because of going to a godless university. And so this is the kind of world that we are living in today. You could call it a topsy-turvy world. But take a look before we take a look at verse 1, I'm sure that many of you have found solace and help and encouragement out of the book of Psalms, and probably even right out of Psalm 91. So if you were to lift up a psalm and focus on it in Psalm 91, what particular verse stands out to you? I mean, They're all good, but what stands out to you in Psalm 91? Jan?
For me, verse 2.
It's verse 2, okay? And in that verse it says, I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Now, the Jewish Aramaic translation of this psalm points out, you can't tell by the psalm because the psalm doesn't give you any help to let you know the details, but it appears as if there is a conversation going on, right? Okay, in the Jewish Aramaic translation of this particular chapter, they put forth the idea of verse 1 is David speaking to Solomon, his son. And then verse 2 is Solomon responding to what his daddy told him. And when you look at it, you say, yeah, I think that could have happened. And then you have verses 3 through 13 is David continuing on to make his case before Solomon. And then at the tail end, the last 3 verses, I believe it is, you find that everything changes, and now it's God that is speaking. It's not David, it's not Solomon, but it's God that is speaking. And I don't know, it's been so many years ago, but I was listening to Dr. Harold J. Lohman out of the campground, and he was preaching on this passage, and he got down to those last 3 verses, and he pointed out that this was God's response. And I'm not sure that I'd ever particularly noticed that before, but when you look at it, you can see it. It does make sense. So what other verse stands out to you in chapter 91 of the book of Psalms? Is there anything else particularly that stands out? Did you say, you didn't say, but if I can read sign language correctly, it must be verse 7. Is that okay? I tell you what, if you're interested in security, your security, verse 7 should give you something. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand. That sounds like a super battle to me. But it shall not come nigh thee. You realize that there were times when the children of Israel were thrust into battle and God came to their rescue, and they didn't even have to lift a sword. God just discomfited their enemy in front of them. And God does amazing things. Any other verse particularly?
I'm just bubbling over.
You what?
I'm just bubbling over. It can't just be one verse for me.
Well, do you just want to read the whole thing for us then?
I could do that.
Okay.
I just noticed that on the last part there, April the 29th of 04, I've got that dated, and that was like 5 days before my last huge surgery, and it's all underlined. Evidently God gave that to me then. And then at the beginning of all this pandemic, I've told you over and over, but I share it over and over, not just with you, but with people that are not here.
Yeah.
That this is my peace. In fact, my daughter-in-law this week, maybe last night, that, such incredible peace, indescribable peace that I have in this, that I'm under the shelter of the Almighty. He's covering me with His faith, and I love the whole thing.
Get on board that boat out there in the middle of the Sea of Galilee when the storm has arose. What do you see when you look at the disciples? What do you see when you look at Jesus? Peace. If Jesus can have it, Jesus can give it. And Jesus does have it, and Jesus can give it. All right? Let's start with verse 1. Okay? Somebody read verse 1 for us.
He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What's that? I interrupted. You were going on, weren't you?
Short verse, I thought it was all one.
Okay, take a look at the verse. Let's kind of dissect it a little bit. What does abide? Okay, what does that communicate to you? What was that?
Live, sort of.
Yeah.
Stay
Take up a residence there. Stay there. What about the secret place? What does that communicate?
You're hidden. It's special.
Pardon me?
You're hidden.
You're hidden, okay? And Christy, what was yours?
It's special.
It is a special place. Okay? What else?
What's hidden from the world? The world has no clue what it's like to be under the shadow of God's almighty hand.
Yeah.
I actually quoted that to somebody in the store one day, and they're like, what does that mean?
Okay, the children of Israel, when they were out there wandering and going from place to place, where was God in all of that? What position did God take up in those times?
The cloud.
Yes, he led them as a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Okay, let me be a little bit more specific. When they set up camp, where was God in all of that?
In the tabernacle.
Yes, and where was the tabernacle?
In the center.
The center, in the midst. Always? Watch my head. And it was only because of the sin of his people that God said to Moses one day, no, you set me up, you set the tabernacle up outside the camp. Because they're a stiff-necked people. And so there was a time in which God was so displeased with them that he withdrew himself. What a sad, terrible day that would have been. Okay? But back to being in the midst. I like that a whole lot better. Okay, so God is in the center of all of the tribes of Israel. And what I have found, perhaps you have found it too, that when you take a look at the writings of some of the commentators, again and again and again, there is a consensus among them that the secret place reflects back to the holies of holies. And it has been referred to as the secret place. And it was a secret place because it wasn't, you walk into a house, we watch a lot of these programs of people who are trying to buy houses, and they go from house to house, and this is, it needs to be open. It has to be more open. Well, when it comes to the tabernacle, the holies of holies was not open. You know the fact that it was separated by a veil, and only the high priest went in once a year on the Day of Atonement. But that was the secret place. That was the Holy of Holies. That was the most holy place. And God said, I will dwell above the mercy seat. And so that was a visual for them. That was an understanding from them. And so it appears that David is reflecting on that, and he is saying, let's just say that the Jewish writers, when they translated it into the Aramaic, got it right, and that David is speaking, and he is speaking to his son Solomon, who is going to be king after him. And he said, he that dwelleth in the secret place. of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. So, next question is, there's no question about it being a special place, right? We all agree on that. How does one get there? How does one get there? Is everybody in there? Is it an exclusive group?
Yes.
Okay? And so how do you get there? Now I'm not asking you to give me Old Testament descriptions and definitions here. I'll let you go even into the New Testament and give me an understanding as how we can enter in to the holies of holies.
Through Jesus, it's the only one Christ who's facing.
Okay, so what's that?
We've been made kings and priests before God, and he said, come boldly to the throne of grace.
Yeah, and part of that was even Old Testament stuff. Okay, if you will keep my commandments, then I will make you a nation of priests, kings, and priests unto me. And but they failed the test, and God had to help them in a different way. So being in a right relationship with God places you in a position of what? Security. Okay? What are the benefits of being in the holy place and not just visiting, not just observing, but staying there, making it home base?
No evil will befall thee there, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling, for he shall give his angels charge over thee, to
Okay.
keep thee in all thy ways.
Yes. And that was a passage that was quoted by the devil to Jesus when he was in the wilderness being tempted. You recall? Cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give angels charge concerning thee, and they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou shalt dash thy foot against a stone. Now, let me ask you this. You see under the shadow of the Almighty. If you go to verse 4, you see that illustration expressed even more. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. A wonderful place to be. So, can a person get the benefit of dwelling without dwelling? Can the person get the benefit? Let me say it another way because I said it backwards. Can a person get the benefit without dwelling in the secret place? All of the promises of God. There are promises for those who do not follow God. And thank God for the promise to the penitent, to the person who repents and calls upon the Lord. But all of the rest of the promises to the people of God, a lot of people approach God as kind of like a genie in a bottle or a Santa Claus on Christmas Day, that we're going to ask him for this and ask him for this. Sometimes God gives it, but not because they ask, but because God in his love is trying to get to them and get their attention. And so God oftentimes will grant people their requests so that he can get their attention and bring them into a right relationship. But a person is not on a proper footing if they are not following God. The 66th chapter of Psalms and verse 18 says, if I regard iniquity in my heart, God will not hear me. If I put up with sin in my heart, in my life, then my prayers aren't going any higher than the ceiling. God will not hear me. It's not that God doesn't actually hear. It's that God's not going to grant you all of your requests. because you have no intention of serving him. So God's not going to be like a genie in a bottle. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Now, if that be David speaking to Solomon, go again to verse 2 and Solomon's response. It's kind of like, oh, okay. I will say of the Lord then, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In him will I trust. Didn't take him long, did it? You and I are the advertisement for Jesus Christ. And do you realize that when things are going well, people might say, just like they did in Job's time, does he serve you for nothing? Look how you blessed him. But when we have difficulties, when we have trials in our life, and then the world observes as we go through them, and how we go through them, and how we act in the midst of them, and they will say something. They used to say this, I heard it all the time when I was a kid growing up. Well, if I ever get religion, I want it like so-and-so. Because they could see a difference. It's not in the best of times that our light shines the brightest. It seems to be in the darkest of the night that the light shines the brightest. And so David responds to Solomon, if the translators have it correctly. And in verse 3 he says, surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust, and his truth shall be thy shield and thy buckler. Somebody pick up with verse 5 through 8.
You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor the destruction that lays waste at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, and then 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked.
All right. Do bad things happen to good people? Of course they do. And Jesus said, even, in this world, you will have trouble. You see, what we just went through Job, and the philosophy that Job's comforters had, it was a philosophy that is also expressed in the book of Psalms. That if things are going bad for you, then you must have done something bad. If things are going good for you, then you must be doing something right. Okay? But that isn't necessarily the case. God doesn't have to keep doing the Job thing over and over again. But some of the things that happen in life, God uses in many different ways. Yes?
I got that book a while back. I got it from the library in the mall. Why do good things happen?
Yes.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
Yes.
And the book was on Job. The whole book
Was it?
basically on Job.
Did
And,
James Dobson write that? No, he advertised it, I know. Okay?
But it was a good book.
I'm sure it was. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you noticed there? Let's go on to the section. There's only 2 sections in this. I don't know if you noticed it. Normally there's 3 sections to a lesson. Once in a while there'll be 4, but today there is only 2. And so in the second section it talks about security does not eliminate responsibility. And so let's take a look at that. Verse 9 through verse 13. Will somebody read verses 9 and 10, please?
If you make the Most High if you make the Most High
Okay. Promises are meant to be claimed. Unclaimed promises, all that means is God made a promise and you never claimed it, and it didn't become reality for you. It is okay for us to quote back to God what God said. Lord, you said. And Lord, I'm claiming that promise. And God's not bothered by that. In fact, there is an unusual passage in the Old Testament. I'm not even sure where it's found. It says, command ye me. Well, I never ever want to get in a position of commanding God. But that's basically what you're doing. You're saying, Lord, you said it. I'm claiming it. I'm believing you to do it. In other words, God's saying, okay, put me to the test and see if I will not come through on this. And you see, man has a concept that is totally different than God's concept. Wouldn't you agree? And so when the final analysis is done and God is finished with what is going on, it may be different than what we may have envisioned, but God was still at work to accomplish what God desires. If we only had all the facts, but we don't. We don't have all of the facts. We don't know why God allows some things, but he does, and he has a purpose for it allowed. Either God initiates something or he allows it, one or the other. It doesn't happen otherwise. When you take a look at Job, it was only that God gave permission that the devil could do what he did to Job. And so we're in that same position where there is a hedge about us. And you can claim that hedge. And you can pray that hedge. I've even prayed a hedge around individuals, have you not? And Lord, just put a hedge around them. Maybe to protect them from themselves, and maybe to protect them from others. It could be a variety of things. But God is faithful, and God will see us through, and God's ways are far above our ways. Let's go on. And he shall give his angels charge. We talked about that. In verse 12, we already quoted that. And verse 13 is kind of interesting. There was one word that stood out of that. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. The adder.
Snake.
You love snakes?
No. Isn't
Boy.
the adder what killed Cleopatra?
I was pastoring in the first church in Fort Lauderdale, and I went to call in somebody's home, and they motioned me to a chair that was in front of what I thought was an aquarium. And I sat down there, and then I looked over my shoulder, and there were no fish in there. And there was no water in there. But there were a couple of good-sized snakes in there. Oh. I still sat there. But I didn't forget that they were there. But this one is the smallest of all snakes. Now, when you think about it, which gets you all excited, the big ones or the little ones? And somebody says, it don't make any difference what size they are. Well, to me it does. You know, I'm bigger than that little bitty one. But what was that?
The venom's worse.
Yeah. And it is in this case. This was an Egyptian snake. It was an adder, and it was the smallest of all snakes, and it was poisonous. It was called an asp, A-S-P. And when I read about it, it said there isn't any remedy. No remedy at all. In fact, if you're going to get bit by a snake and not survive, this is the one to get bit by. Because it puts you to sleep and you never wake up. And life is over for you. How many times have we said, oh, if I could just go to sleep and then wake up in the arms of Jesus? Well, that's what would happen here if you got bit by an adder. You'd wake up in the arms of Jesus. Now, so if you have a hankering for going to heaven, visit Egypt and find the adder, the asp. Okay, go to verse 14. Somebody read verse 14.
Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name.
Now you see, are you reading from the NIV? Okay, the NIV does something that helps us here, just in case we're missing it. It says, read the first phrase, first line.
Because he loves me, says the Lord.
That's it. Because he loved me, because he hath set his love upon me, saith the Lord. It's the Lord that is speaking here. Once you see it, then you can't miss it. But until you see it, you might miss it. And so, because of verse 1, he that dwelleth in the secret place, every verse is contingent upon verse 1. If verse 1 is not a reality, then the rest of it isn't either. And so, he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And so, it is a reflection back, and God is saying now, because he has set his love upon me. Because that's really what it's about. It's a love relationship. If you are in the secret place, it's there because you love him. And you love him supremely. You love him more than anything else. And you just want to stay there. You remember when Jesus in Matthew chapter 17 was on the Mount of Transfiguration? You remember the disposition of Peter after he saw what he saw and heard what he heard? He said, let's just stay here. Let's build 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And let's just stay here. Have you not been in some services in the past when there was just something about the powerful presence of God that was moving in the service, and people were getting victory at the altar, and people were testifying, and nobody wanted to go home. It was just enjoying the presence of the Lord. I'm sure there have been times like that in your own personal devotions where the presence of God doesn't come at your devotional time the same way every day. Have you noticed that? Okay? But there have been some special moments when time just flew. This was just glorious and wonderful, and you were praising the Lord. Not long ago, I sent my wife, because she is taking care of her mother at night, 4 nights a week, and I sent her something that God just gave me the thought. Right? It was like I hadn't even thought of this, but it was a song. And so I went to YouTube, and you can usually find it on YouTube. And I found it just like that. Brought it up. Oh, glorious, glorious. And I sent to her, and I said, you might want to show it to your mom, too. This was special today. Well, it might not have been as special to her as it was to me. Because those sometimes are just personal moments, a time alone with God. You remember when your children were young and just started to learn to walk? And they got into everything. What did you do as a parent? Tied everything down?
I made a lot of trips to the emergency room.
We're going to be on a higher show.
Thank you very much, because that's where I wanted to go. Okay, set it up where they can't reach it. Now, I want you to get this. There are times that God sets us up out of the reach of our enemy. That is the message that comes out. Chantel, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Linda, but hadn't seen her in a long time, 2 years. Okay? She lives out in Colorado now. Okay? How do you get sun in Colorado? I don't know. Okay. But hear this verse once again. Because he has set his love upon me, I will deliver him. I will set him on high. Because he hath known my name. And so God sets us up out of the reach of our enemies. I mean, that's the hedge of God, putting us in a position beyond the reach of our enemies. And when we set our love on him, we are drawing close to him. And I've got to come to a close here, but I've at least got to read these last two verses. God's still speaking, and he says, he shall call upon me, and I will answer him. And I will be with him in trouble. And I will deliver him and honor him. With long life shall I satisfy him and show him my salvation. Well, I got to thinking about those two verses, particularly verse 16, but also verse 15. And I began to search a little bit. And I felt like that Matthew Henry probably got a grip of it a little bit more than some of the other commentators. Matthew Henry was a Presbyterian theologian. But he says this, talking about length of days I will satisfy him. He says, they shall live long enough. They shall be continued in this world till they have done the work they were sent into the world for and are ready for heaven. And that is long enough. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, I guess the Lord's not finished with me yet? Okay? Kind of goes along with it. Who would wish to live a day longer than God that has some work for you to do, either by him or for him? They think it long enough for God, by his grace, shall wean them from the world and make them willing to leave it. I don't think he has to do too much more. I'm ready. Come on, Lord Jesus. I mean, this world is a strange, strange world and getting stranger every day. And he says, I will show him my salvation. It appears that more than one has this concept. He's talking about eternal salvation. And I will show him my salvation. Pastor Nick, I think it was, gave this story on of a healing took place of a young boy. Was it you? It wasn't you? Okay. That's right. It was Pastor Paul talking about prayer on Wednesday. And the young boy, 15, 16 years of age, had cancer. They prayed for him. God healed him. Later on, cancer came back. And the boy, with some revelation from God, obviously, said to them, don't think he understood it at that point, but he says, in 3 days, God is going to heal me. And God took him to heaven. My mother was that way. I sat in a healing service with her, and I said, Mom, you want to go forward? And she said, no, I just believe God just told me he's going to take care of it. And he did. He took her home to heaven. God doesn't always do that. Sometimes he heals. He can heal. There's nothing that God cannot do. And we're not going to put God in a box and say you have to always work this way, because God's wiser than we are. And if we could just see it, but we have difficulty doing that. Well, back to verse 1. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Father God, thank you so much for Old Testament scripture that helps us in New Testament living. We love you, and we thank you for the provisions that you have made for us and your commitment to us that you will be with us always, even unto the end of the age. Have your way, Father, in all that is said and done in the service that follows.